The story begins where the world of fierce school fighters, Amagai Kohei, a third-year student from STM Senomon, has the ambition to rule all high schools in the Sword region. Currently, he leads an alliance of 3 high schools, consisting of STM Senomon with the help of his childhood friend Suzaki Ryo. Kamasaka High School, led by Hiruro Reiji and Iwatsugu Katui, is known as Ganji. Ebara High School, with 3 tough leaders, Fujin, Shoji, and Raijin. Elsewhere, Hanao Fujio, the principal of Oya High School, comes to Suzuran High School alone. His goal? To meet Suzuran's strongest student, Lao. His presence immediately attracted the attention of all Suzuran students. When asking Lao, however, before he could say much, Fujio was instead ganged up on from all directions. Despite being outnumbered, Fujio still fights. Suddenly from above, a mysterious man jumps and challenges Fujio to a one-on-one fight. This man's name is Binzo. The fight begins. Fujio struggles for a while, but he manages to dodge some of Binzo's attacks. When other students try to interfere, Binzo gets angry. He thinks that only he is worthy of fighting Fujio. Fujio finally lands a powerful punch to Binzo's face, knocking him down. However, surprisingly, Binzo gets back up without feeling any pain. Is this a monster or a human? Binzo immediately strangled Fujio, trying to finish him off. With great difficulty, Fujio managed to retaliate and kicked Binzo until he was thrown away, but Binzo still hadn't passed out. When the tension peaked, another student named Yamaguchi Magoroko suddenly appeared, ready to challenge Fujio. However, before the duel occurred, a student named Mercy stopped him. Mercy reminded everyone that Oya High School had clashed with Housen High School recently. He also told Fujio something that made everyone laugh. Lao is very popular. If you want to meet, take the queue number first. Fujio chuckled, but he realized this was just the beginning of a big battle. After hearing that he had to take the queue number to meet Lao, Fujio asked, "Where can I take the queue number?" Without further ado, Magoroko immediately kicked Fujio hard. "That's your queue number," Mercy said with a laugh. "Suzuran is different. Just want to meet people. You have to be prepared for duel first." When leaving Suzuran, Fujio met a man in black. Without hesitation, he immediately realized, this person is Lao. However, before Fujio was able to talk a lot, his friend Lao was rather resentful because Fujio looked at Lao with a serious look. But Lao told him to leave because Lao didn't want to be disturbed. Lao just said briefly, "Go. I don't want to be disturbed." Scary. The style of speech is really cold, but instead of retreating, Fujio was even more curious about Lao. After from Suzuran, Fujio immediately drove to Housen High School. There, he met with Jinawa, Sidakin, SAW, Murashoji, and Odajima Yuken. Oya High School had previously clashed with Housen, but after that they became even more familiar. When talking, a student named Sabakan suddenly said, "Fujio," after Suzuran. Suddenly, everyone in the room was surprised. Jinawa immediately told Sabakan to explain more about the situation in Suzuran today. Sabakan explained that the current Suzuran did not have a permanent leader. However, there is one of the most powerful factions, the Lao faction. This faction only contains 6 people, but they are all upper-class fighters. Itokamui specialist in Suzuran spy, expert in surveillance. Seda Kansuke, the strongest leader in Class 2, has a deadly blow. Yamaguchi Magoroko, known as the strongest member of the Lao faction. Takahiko, Mercy, the person who let Fujio go home without injuries. Miya Ichikozo, Binzo, in resilience, has the most powerful endurance in Suzuran. Misaki Mario, Lao, the strongest student in Suzuran, the owner of many legends. Even Housen's supreme leader Sachio can't beat Lao. Hearing this, instead of being afraid, Fujio was even more curious. Fujio finally returned to his headquarters at Oya High School. When gathering with his members, he told his experience through Suzuran and Housen alone. Jamuo immediately went berserk. "Don't you think so, Fujio? You almost died at Suzuran. Lao is a monster. His legend is no joke." However, instead of worrying, the other members laughed. They thought Jamuo was just exaggerating and making things up. Meanwhile, at Suzuran, many students are not happy with Mercy letting Fujio go just like that. They think it makes Suzuran look weak in the eyes of other schools. However, Magoroko explains, Fujio is the second person to successfully break through Suzuran after Hoen's leader, Sachio. He deserves respect. Mercy added, he's our guest. He wants to meet Lao. Let the Lao faction take care of it. Without wasting any time, Mercy immediately ordered Itokamui to gather information about Fujio. Sin switches back to Oya High School. Jamao opens an old book and begins to tell the legend of Lao. Legend 1. Lao once ransacked Kurosaki Private High School. Legend 2. Lao once went on a rampage that caused the highway to be closed. Legend 3. Lao caused the closure of a bar when he was a first grader. In that incident, several people were injured, and Lao's opponent almost died. Hearing this story, instead of being afraid, the Oya High School students became even more enthusiastic in supporting Fujio to fight Lao. Elsewhere, Kamasaka High School, Ebara High School, and Senomon High School are gathered in a bar. They plan to conquer all the schools in sword territory. When Amagai arrives, Reijin immediately orders an attack on Oya High School. However, Amagai calmly replied, "Increase the number of members first. We need more power." Sin switch. At Oya High School, Fujio receives a letter from Sachio that was sent through Sabakan before he went abroad. The letter reads, "If Housen High and Oya High are involved in a clash, they must help each other." Fujio is forbidden to find out more about Lao, but for Fujio, the more forbidden, the more curious. Meanwhile, Fujio's close friend named Sukasa realized that he could not stop Fujio from meeting Lao. He took the initiative to find out the truth about Lao with the help of Todoroki, the same one from Oya High School, and Yuken from Housen High School. They went to Mercy's residence, one of Lao's closest people. At first, Mercy refused to talk. However, once Tsukasa mentioned Fujio's name, Mercy finally spoke up. Tsukasa then shows a photo of Itokamui spying on them. Mercy immediately falls silent. Obviously, Lao and his faction have been watching Fujio's movements since the beginning. The next day, Tsukasa, Fujio, and Jamo go to an orphanage. Because Tsukasa got information from Mercy about Lao, it turns out this place is Lao's childhood home. Lao was abandoned by his parents as a baby and grew up here. Since childhood, Lao was a quiet and crybaby child. Until one day, he broke up a fight between children at the orphanage. At that moment, he realized that he had extraordinary powers. From then on, he promised to use his powers to protect his younger siblings at the orphanage. The legendary bar incident? It turns out that Lao beat up a father who often abused his son. Not just a thug, Lao is actually a protector. After hearing this story, Fujio didn't hesitate any longer. He immediately moved to meet Lao. From a distance, Tsukasa and Jamo held their breath. They saw Fujio and Lao facing each other. They're going to fight? However, finally, when faced with Lao, instead of starting a fight, Fujio said he wanted to be friends with Lao. According to Fujio, Lao is a good person. At a bar, Shidoken from Housen High School gets an invitation from his old friend Saboten. Amagai and his gang are already there. They offer money so that Housen High School will join in attacking Oya High School. However, Shidoken flatly refuses. He even warns Amagai, never underestimate Oya High. Oya High is a pain in the ass, Shidoken says, and Shidoken walks out of the bar. But the problem isn't over yet. At Oya High School, Fujio announces that he is now friends with Lao. Of course, everyone doesn't believe it. However, Tsukasa confirms it. Oya High School now has a connection with the strongest person in Suzuran. Todoroki comes with bad news. Kamasaka High School kids start showing up around Oya High School. They're clearly preparing for war. Elsewhere, Sochi from Ebara High School is curious about Suzaki. Back then, Suzaki was the strongest person in Nami High School. But now he's just Amagai's underling? Sochi asks. But Suzaki chooses to remain silent and leave. Apparently, Suzaki and Amagai actually have a long history. Suzaki's father is the Amagai family's personal driver. He purposely transferred Suzaki to the same school as Amagai. His father's hope? So that they could be friends like when they were little. However, Amagai, who came from a wealthy family, rejected Suzaki. According to Amagai, they were not on the same level. Is this the reason why Suzaki still followed Amagai, even though his heart was not willing? Sin switch. At Housen High School, Yuken is practicing wrestling when Sabakan comes to tell him there's a call for him. It turns out it's from Shidoken. However, Yuken ignores it and continues practicing. On the streets, Shidoken is now surrounded by Saboten's men. They plan to finish off Shidoken so that information about the bar plan doesn't get out. Meanwhile, Yuken finally calls back, but no answer. Yuken begins to suspect that something bad has happened. Story shifts. At Oya High School, Sukasa tells Fujio that the kids from Kamasaka High School and Senomon High School are often seen in their area. A big clash is just around the corner. However, Fujio casually says, if they come looking for trouble, just beat them up. Sukasa immediately scolds Fujio. As a leader, Fujio can't be selfish. He has to think of all the students of Oya High School, not just himself. Will Fujio start to change and lead wisely? Or will Oya High School fall under a big attack? I'll pretend not to know for now. Oya High School vs Amagai Alliance. War begins. The Amagai Alliance begins to move on the streets. Their main target, Oya High School. If Oya High School falls, the entire sword territory will fall into their hands. The Alliance splits into groups to attack various points. Ganji and the Kamasaka High School students attack Kyoshi and Yasushi. The Ebara High School students attack Suji and Sibaman. Senomon High School students attack the other Oya students. Amagai, Suzaki, and Reiji block Fujio, Sukasa, and Jamuo. The massive attack begins. The entire Oya High School student body is now surrounded. Nakagoshi was badly injured while trying to protect his friends from Saboten's attack. Elsewhere, Jamuo locks the door to save his friends. Kyoshi is furious, but Jamuo drags her away for their safety. On the front lines, a brutal fight ensues. Reiji secretly hides a weapon in his hand. Fujio dodges every attack carefully. After a fierce battle, Fujio finally manages to take down Reiji. However, the Amagai Alliance is still too much. Sukasa is shocked to see Suzaki, the former leader of Nami High School, now a subordinate of Amagai. A fight between them is inevitable. Suzaki attacks Sukasa brutally. Sukasa is thrown, then kicked hard in the stomach. Despite the pain, Sukasa still holds on. However, Amagai comes and hits Sukasa with a stick over and over again. Sukasa is defeated badly. Sabaten reports that Fujio is still not defeated. Amagai is furious. In retaliation, he orders his men to kidnap Sukasa. They will use Sukasa as bait to lure the entire Oya High School. This cunning strategy could be a big disaster for Fujio and his friends. After the fighting subsides, Fujio and the surviving students gather at the headquarters. Many are injured, and Sukasa is still in the enemy's grip. As the leader, Fujio must make an important decision. However, Fujio is confused and doesn't know what to do. His members are angry. Amagai stood confidently, looking down at the bound and battered Sukasa. With a voice full of mockery, he said, "Your friends are ridiculous. If you have to protect someone, it will only make you weak. True strength does not need friends." But instead of being afraid, Sukasa laughed. Amagai immediately became furious. Without thinking, he returned to beat Sukasa, beating him with anger. After feeling satisfied, he left, leaving Sukasa in a miserable condition. But before he really left, Sukasa asked one question. Why you, Suzaki? You're strong, but why do you want to be a cowardly subordinate like Amagai? Suzaki fell silent. In a dark room, Suzaki sat alone. His face was blank, his thoughts drifting to the past. He remembered the conversation Amagai and Saboten had some time ago. At that time, Amagai said in a disdainful tone, Suzaki's family business went bankrupt. His father is now my family's driver. He's been my slave for a long time. Suzaki, who heard this, was shocked and immediately asked Amagai. All this time, he thought they were friends. But Amagai's answer made his chest feel tight. I don't believe in friends, Amagai said in a cold tone. People are only after my money. I don't need friends. I only need slaves. Suzaki was speechless. Amagai had never considered him a friend. Elsewhere, Soji from Ebara High School talks with Fujin and Raijin. They are starting to doubt this alliance. Their purpose in joining is only to fight Todoroki, not to submit to Amagai's orders. While they are still discussing, Todoroki suddenly appears in front of them. Do you want to fight me? Todoroki asks casually. Okay. But there is one condition. If I win, Ebara High School will leave the alliance. Without thinking twice, Fujin and Raijin accept the challenge. The duel ensues. A brutal fight between Todoroki and the two strongest fighters of Ebara High School takes place in a hidden place, far from Amagai's observation. Meanwhile, Fujio finally returns to meet his friends at Oya High School. He knows that as a leader, he cannot continue to run away from his responsibilities. All members of Oya High School look at him with hope. Not long after, Todoroki appeared with a battered face. However, he brought good news. Ebara High School has left the alliance. They won't bother us anymore. Everyone was shocked. Yasushi then received a call from Jamuo. Shidaken is also in the hospital, said the voice on the other end of the phone. Hearing that, Todoroki immediately took over the phone. The situation was getting more serious. Suddenly, Fujio's cell phone rang. But when he answered it, it wasn't Sukasa's voice that came from the other end. It was Amagai's voice. In a mocking tone, Amagai said, If you want Sukasa to live, come to my base tomorrow. Fujio gripped his cell phone tightly. His eyes were full of anger. The final battle was getting closer. All the remaining members of Oya High School are full of enthusiasm to retaliate against Amagai. They can't wait to take revenge and save Sukasa. However, amidst the excitement, Todoroki spoke up. Don't be stupid. Even though Ebara High has left the alliance, we are still outnumbered. Attacking from the front would be suicide. He warned them that their top priority was not revenge, but the mission to rescue Sukasa. However, as usual, Fujio casually replied, Don't worry. I'm sure we can beat them. Hearing that, Todoroki immediately became angry. Don't talk nonsense, Fujio. You're the leader. Don't just think about fighting, but think about your friends too. Fujio was silent for a moment. Then unexpectedly, he bowed deeply in front of Todoroki. Thank you, Todoroki. Thanks to you, Ebara High School has left the alliance. Everyone who saw that was shocked. Fujio was not the type to humble himself, but this time, he was sincerely grateful. Then, with full confidence, Fujio said, Don't worry. Oya High School is not alone. If our enemy is an alliance, then we will also form an alliance. That morning, as the sun began to shine on the battlefield, Housen High School arrived. Jinkawa led them, walking with dignity. We've come to help you, Fujio, he said. The reason is clear. They want revenge for Shidaken's attack. In addition, Jinkawa also respects Saicho's mandate to have Housen High School help Oya High School in a situation like this. Now, with Housen High School on their side, Fujio's alliance is getting stronger. Without waiting long, they move towards Amagai's headquarters. Meanwhile, Amagai was being given a report. Ebara High has left the alliance, one of his subordinates said. However, Amagai only smiled lightly. It doesn't matter. Oya High is on the verge of collapse. They are the only ones left. But his smile quickly disappeared when he heard the next report. Oya High School has arrived, and they brought Housen High School. Amagai's eyes widened. Meanwhile, in front of his headquarters, Subtitles and Ganji were ready to welcome their arrival. A major battle was inevitable. No one expected it. The Amagai alliance was caught completely off guard. They had no idea that Oya High would come with support from Housen High. As soon as Fujio gave the command, the entire combined force rushed forward, charging into the enemy ranks. The atmosphere immediately turned into a brutal battlefield. Fists, kicks, throwing of hard objects, all happened simultaneously. Suddenly, a voice from the loudspeaker was heard amidst the chaos. Sukasa is in the next building. Without thinking, Fujio and his friends immediately broke in. However, because the front was crowded with enemies, Fujio and Todoroki chose to find another way. Turns out, the other route was no better. Amagai's men seemed endless. But Fujio and Todoroki were not afraid. They continued to attack, advance, and charge through everything that got in their way. Meanwhile outside, the battle between Housen and Amagai's alliance forces is getting more and more brutal. Inside the building, Amagai, who is starting to be cornered, calls for reinforcements. In the narrow hallway, Genji blocks the way with a metal cabinet, while Raichi throws glass bottles from the upper floor to block the enemies who are going up. Yuken and his team finally manage to knock down the cabinet and follow forward, helping Fujio and Todoroki. The three of them are now only one step away from where Sukasa is being held hostage. But their path is still guarded by Ganji and his men, who attack by throwing glass bottles from various directions. Luckily, help came again. From behind, a loud explosion rocked the building. Everyone turned. Everyone looked over. Suzuran has come. Saboten, who saw their arrival, immediately exclaimed, "This is none of your business." But Lao stepped forward calmly and replied, "Fujio is my friend. That is enough." Without a weapon, Lao instantly mows down a line of fully armed enemies. His attacks are fast, precise, and deadly. He is truly a monster on the battlefield. Inside the building, Amagai, cornered, orders Suzaki to intervene. But Fujio's alliance is undeterred. Lao clears the way, while Fujio, Todoroki, and Yuken rush into the room where Sukasa is being held hostage. There, Sukasa was hanging and tied tightly. But Fujio couldn't save him just like that. There were still Amagai's men waiting, and now Suzaki himself would intervene. The final battle is inevitable. Fujio, Todoroki, and Yuken fight shoulder to shoulder, defeating all obstacles for one goal, bringing Sukasa home safely. Amagai stood on the second-floor balcony, staring angrily at the ground below. Without hesitation, he cut the ropes that tied Sukasa. Sukasa's body immediately fell freely downwards. Luckily, Fujio, who saw this from afar, immediately jumped and managed to catch Sukasa in time. Meanwhile, on the other side, a fierce duel took place. Suzaki fought against Todoroki, who was already exhausted. Blow after blow made Todoroki increasingly cornered, but he was still standing. Not long after, Yuken came after and immediately helped Todoroki. Now, the two of them tried to withstand Suzaki's brutal attacks. After being rescued, Sukasa looked at Fujio and said softly but firmly, "Amagai, let me finish him off." Fujio nodded, but before he could join Amagai's fight, he had to deal with Suzaki first. When Todoroki and Yuken were about to fall, Fujio came and immediately kicked Suzaki hard until it hit his ear. Before they could catch their breath, Saboten arrived with his entourage. Yuken immediately stepped forward, his anger boiling over, because Saboten was the one who put Shidaken in the hospital. Todoroki faces the remnants of Saboten's men alone. Outside the building, things are getting more heated, especially when the reinforcements for Amagai arrive with a large number of men. But when they were about to go inside, a hard kick hit them from behind. They fell. Everyone turned their heads. It was Ueda Satsuyo, the leader of Housen High School who had just returned from abroad. He stood proudly, his eyes blazing. "I have business here too," he said. Inside the building, Sukasa now stands before Amagai. Meanwhile, Fujio duels one-on-one against Suzaki. Suzaki beat Fujio up badly. Blood dripped from Fujio's face, his body was covered in wounds, but he kept standing and fighting. He refused to go down before saving everyone. On the other hand, Saboten handcuffed one of Yuken's hands, but Yuken smiled coldly, then put the other handcuff on Saboten's own hand. "If you want to play crazy, let's play together," said Yuken, then beat him up badly. Outside, Satsuyo fights alone, battering all the enemies like a hurricane. Inside, Todoroki is hit with a glass bottle, but that only lifts his spirits. With exploding rage, Todoroki finishes off his enemies one by one. Meanwhile, Fujio began to find an opening. With the remaining strength, he kicked Suzaki hard against the wall. Amagai was almost defeated, who panicked and tried to grab his weapon and strangled Sukasa with it. But Fujio came and kicked Amagai from the side, making his weapon fall. In a staggering state, Suzaki still tried to kick Sukasa, but this time Sukasa managed to ward it off. Yuken then came and shouted, "There are only two of you left, Amagai and Suzaki. Your men are finished." But Amagai grinned. "Who says that? I still have plenty of troops." Suddenly the large door opened. Amagai smiled in satisfaction, but that smile quickly disappeared when he saw who had entered. It wasn't his squad. It was Lau and his faction. Soon after, the students from Housen High School and Oya High School followed him into the room. Amagai immediately panicked. He hurriedly tried to call for help, but there was no answer. But who would have thought Oya High School actually managed to turn the tables? After Lau and his faction, plus Oya and Housen's troops arrived, all of Amagai's men were killed one by one. Amagai's troops collapsed. Amagai, who stood frozen in the middle of the room, looked around in anger and panic. With his remaining breath, he ordered the rest of his troops to advance. But it turned out, they all ran away. No one wanted to fight anymore. Now, only Amagai and Suzaki were left. In that silence, Suzaki stepped forward. His face was bloody, his body was covered in wounds, but his voice was clear. "This fight is not over yet." Fujio immediately stepped forward as well. Without saying much, the two of them fought again. Fists meet. They fall, crawl, then get up again. Punch after punch continues to be thrown, even though their bodies can barely stand. Amagai, who saw Suzaki still defending him until the end, began to remember the past. Back then, when they were little, Amagai was often bullied. And at that time, Suzaki came to his defense. A single punch from Suzaki was enough to knock the enemy down. Since then, Suzaki swore to always protect Amagai. A hard punch from Suzaki sent Fujio crashing to the floor. Amagai immediately laughed in satisfaction. "I win!" But just a few seconds later, Fujio stood up again. His body was swaying, his legs were unsteady, but his gaze was still burning. He looked at Suzaki and said, "Come on, continue." He remembered his old promise, to protect Amagai until he became the strongest. But now, when he saw Fujio, who continued to stand for his friends, his heart began to waver. The two of them started hitting each other again, testing each other to see who was stronger. Until finally Suzaki fell down, unable to get up again. Amagai looked at him in disappointment. Not willing to accept defeat, he took out a small knife from his pocket. With eyes full of revenge, Amagai advanced to stab Fujio in the back. But suddenly, Suzaki stood up and held his hand. "Stop, Amagai. This isn't the way." Amagai was shocked. Suzaki stared at him with anger and sadness. Amagai was shocked. Suzaki stared at him with anger and sadness. "You're not a coward, Amagai. Don't destroy everything we've built just because you lost." Amagai didn't answer. Suzaki continued, bringing them back to their old promise, about how they once promised to become the strongest together, not by cheating. Then, Suzaki. In a loud voice, he said, "From now on, Senomon High School is under Oya High School." Everyone fell silent, but not Fujio. He refused. "I do fight to become strong, but I don't care who's on top or who's on the bottom. What's important is that we all fight together." And that's where it all ended. Not with power, not with domination, but with the understanding that true strength isn't about who leads, but who doesn't abandon their friends. The ending of this story really makes me smile. After all the chaos, blood, and brutal clashes they went through, Amagai finally came to his senses. He fell silent, staring at Suzaki, who was still panting, then looked at Fujio and the rest of Oya High School, who were standing together. In his mind, his childhood promise with Suzaki flashed again. A promise about friendship, not power. Finally, with his head slightly bowed, Amagai admitted defeat. Before leaving, Fujio approached Suzaki. In his typical style, he smiled casually and said, "We'll fight again, okay? Some other time." Suzaki just chuckled. And for the first time, Amagai and Suzaki smiled, not because of victory, but because they finally understood the true meaning of battle. It's not about who wins, but who stays by their friend's side. Outside the building, the atmosphere had begun to calm down. But suddenly, Housen students were shocked. Sachio had returned. Everyone stared at their leader, who stood quietly with a smirk. And not only that, Sachio was also surprised. He saw Lao from Suzuran standing casually with Fujio. Housen's arch-enemy was on their side, Fujio explained while patting Lao's shoulder. "Now, we're friends." Lao just nodded calmly. Fujio smiled broadly and said, "But we still have to fight later, okay?" Sachio immediately replied, "Oh, don't forget about me too. I want to challenge Lao too." The three leaders, Fujio, Lao, and Sachio, finally clenched their fists together. A promise that even though they now stood as friends, the battle between legends was not over. Some time passed. Amagai and Suzaki met Fujio and Sukasa again. Amagai, in his cool style, said, "Suzaki is still curious. He wants to fight Fujio again." But Sukasa casually replied, "Wow, what a shame. Fujio is really popular now. You have to get a queue number first." Fujio immediately approached Suzaki and kicked him lightly. "That's your queue number," he said with a satisfied smile. And with a big laugh, the story of this big fight ended. Oya High School may be full of chaos, but one thing is for sure. They are never alone. Because in their world, friendship is the greatest power. Messages from this movie. In a world full of violence, true friends are the most real strength. Never underestimate the meaning of standing together. It's not about who is the strongest, but who stays by your side until the end. If you like friendship and a never-give-up soul, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of the other stories. Thank you.